dinozauri, ce sunt ei? Strămoși acoperiți cu poze reptilelor, care despuneau ouă cu coaje tare, aveau picioarele plasate sub corp și în urmă cu circa 56 de milioane de ani au dispărut datorită impactului Terei cu un asteroid de dimensiuni mari. În funcție de articulația șoldului, ei se împart în două categorii, sau rischieni cu bazin de șopârlă sau ornitischieni cu bazin de pasăre. Cum se formează o fosilă? Am găsit câteva imagini, destul de sugestive, zic eu. Când animalul moare, carnea lui este fie consumată de alte animale, fie se descompune în ritmul în care se descompune orice carne, scheletul, materia dură, în schimb, expusă intemperiilor timp îndelungat, se transformă ca orice lemn, os și așa mai departe, supus activităților de eroziune în praf. Ei bine, în condiții cu totul excepționale, că de-aia sunt rare fosilele, atunci când carcasa este acoperită fie de o viitură cu nămol, o alunecare de teren, sau o dună de nisip, cum este cazul în anumite zone deșertice, oasele se prezervă, se conservă, fosilizându-se. E important să vorbim un pic despre fenomenul de migrație al continentelor și o să vedeți de ce. Deci în Triasic cam așa arăta planeta. Acum 250-200 de milioane de ani exista un singur supercontinent numit Pangaea. În Jurasic, deci acum 200-145 de milioane de ani, continentul inițial se divide într-un continent nordic, Laurasia, și unul sudic, Gondwana. În Cretacii, și aici ajungem la perioada pe care o cercetăm noi, continentele s-au deplasat până aproximativ în poziția actuală. India s-a dezlipit de Africa și s-a apropiat încet de Asia. Poziția noastră, a actualului teritoriu al României, era undeva aici. După cum puteți vedea în această zonă, era un arhipelag. Unde le căutăm, aceste fosile? Trebuie ținut seama de faptul că Pământul nu arăta așa cum este acum. Zona în care noi ne aflăm acum era o zonă cu un climat subtropical, cu două anotimpuri, unul secetos și unul ploios, un anotimp musonic. Ei, tocmai acest lucru a făcut posibilă apariția acestor fosile, pentru că în acest anotimp musonic, viiturile de multe ori ucideau aceste animale și le și acopereau cu sediment, ele păstrându-se până în zilele noastre. Unde le căutăm? Deci, în mod normal, le găsim în albile și malurile râurilor, în zonele afectate de alunecări de teren și eroziune naturală a solului, în râpe și ravene. Rare sunt cazurile în care, știu eu, săpând pentru un obiectiv anume găsește așa ceva, deoarece e vorba de sedimente aflate la câțiva metri sub nivelul actual de călcare. Cercetarea de teren, periegheza, este absolut identică cu cea folosită în arheologie, doar obiectivul este altul și anume descoperirea acestor zone fosilifere. În ultimii ani s-au descoperit câteva zeci de puncte cu astfel de descoperiri în zona Sebeșului. Sunt concentrate aceste fosile în anumite lentile de sedimente, mai mari sau mai mici, zonele care reprezintă vechi capcane sedimentare. Ce este acest termen? Ați văzut astăzi, plimbându-vă din nefericire pe malul râurilor noastre, că sunt pline de gunoaie. Dar aceste gunoaie, peturi, pungi, se adună cu predilecție în anumite zone. Același lucru se întâmpla și atunci. Leșurile care pluteau în urma unei inundații se adunau, într-un cod, mai nu știu cum, unde curentul nu era suficient de puternic, eșuau acolo, urmând a fi devorate de alte animale și respectiv ulterior astupate. Cam așa arată niște rezultatele a unei periegheze. Vedeți acolo fragmente de oase expuse în urma eroziunii cauzate de apă. E vorba de situl de la Sebeș, practic acea insuliță, acea platformă pe care o vedeți acolo, este plină cu astfel de fosile. Din păcate, de rare ori o putem vedea în forma în care o vedeți în fotografia aceea, pentru că de obicei e acoperită de apă. Nu odată am fost surprinși, ăștia dând drumul la baraj, ne-au luat echipamente, odată era și mașina în mijlocul râului, dar am ieșit cumva. N-ar fi prima oară de altfel. Nu știu. Ca tehnici de săpătură, simplu. Îl putem vedea acolo pe Matei cu Târnăcopul. De acolo s-a scos un crocodil. Aceasta este tot la glod. Aici puteți vedea, mă rog, atât cât se poate prin fotografia prin apă, este un os lung, o coasă era. Astea deja sunt un pic mai civilizate. Este platforma aceasta care am văzut-o înainte. Acolo avem o tibie și un peronel de hadrozaur. Ăsta e un animal erbivor, cam de talia unei vaci din ziua de astăzi. Aici deja puteți vedea o vertebră modală cu apofida. Și ce e foarte interesant, am găsit dinți de crocodil în jurul acestui schelet dezarticulat. Așa arată un dinți de crocodil. Am pus psicocație. Mă rog, ele sunt scoase, se lasă pe un suport, ca în arheologie. Încercăm să stăm și sub ele ca să le putem duce în bucăți cât mai mari. Acolo era un mic, când a trecut mașina, de cei mai mari. La fel, se procedează la fel ca în arheologie, se descoperă respectivele oase, se marchează pe hârtie după nord, sud, după toate regulile. Îmi aduc aminte acolo că era să ne ia și generatorul apa. O chestie care, nu că nu se practică în arheologie, dar noi n-am practicat-o, nu știu de ce, probabil din lipsă de materiale, osul fiind un material friabil și după ce îl descoperi dintr-un sediment care de cele mai multe ori este umed, în directa expunere cu aerul se alterează, crapă, se rupe în bucăți. Noi folosim un plastic dizolvat în acetonă sau în diluant, cu care impregnăm atât osul cât și sedimentul, pentru a-l fixa cât mai bine, în momentul când îl miști, să nu-l distrugi. Cel mai complicat e la oasele de pterozaur. Aici, dacă se dă foarte bine, este un astfel de os. De fapt, acolo a fost o lentilă cu 10 oase de pterozaur. Aici sape așa în mal, cum făceam în perioada studenției pe la podul Pripocului, la complexe. Ele se desenează, acolo puteți vedea scheletul dezarticulat de hadrozaur. Din păcate, credeam că se vede un pic mai mare. Sunt multe elemente, inclusiv vertebrele și dinții de crocodil. Deci ca și când desenezi un grun. Iar acolo îi un profil stratigrafic, spre deosebire de arheologie, unde practic noi desenăm profilul secțiunii sau a malului pe care îl îndreptăm cu toate complexele secționate care se văd în el. Aici nu sunt relevante aceste profile, se întocmește un profil general al tuturor stratelor de sediment din zona respectivă, marcându-se stratele care conțin oase. Acolo, din păcate, nu se văd, sunt figurate oase și frunze, pentru că găsești și astfel de frunze fosilizate, care sunt indicii foarte bune privind paleomediul din perioada respectivă. La fel puteți vedea acolo câteva ciolane. O chestie pe care frecvent o folosim, și anume să gipsăm respectivele descoperiri, pentru că este mult mai ușor să le cureți stând la birou și având tot confortul decât sub amenințarea, știu eu, intemperiilor sau a hidrocentralelor de pe Valea Sebeșului. E simplu cum se face, pentru cine nu știe. Peste oasele, mă rog, pe care le-ai descoperit, se aplică fie o folie de aluminiu din aia alimentară, fie hârtie igienică, pentru a evita lipirea feșei gipsate de artefact, de os. Se gipsează, se așteaptă, în 15-20 de minute el se întărește. Timpul normal de o scară e 4-8 ore. Nu stai așa dacă nu-i nevoie, da? Aștepți o oră și le scoți. Mă rog, cam așa arăt după această operațiune. Și acolo puteți vedea colegele noastre azi dimineață care la muzeu la Sebeș curățau deja câteva astfel de descoperiri făcute în ultima vreme. Pentru că aia e următoarea parte a activității, până să ajungi să, știu eu, să le valorifici științific, trebuie lipite, curățate și așa mai departe. Cam în linii mari asta este. Nu sunt diferențe majore în ceea ce privește modul cum se abordează o săpătură de genul acesta față de una arheologică. De orice arheolog care are o minimă experiență pe un șantier arheologic poate în siguranță să sape astfel de lucruri. Îi dau cuvântul lui Pilu care o să ne spună cum găsești fosilele stând în fotoliu.
Dacă aveți careva întrebări, told them that they could, our remaining colleagues, they could always ask me because I'm here all the time, so I'm just going to make the presentation in English. It's called the use of the gigapump documentation technique in paleontological field work. I also put up other uses of it in documenting the actual fossils based on work that we did in Germany with Matthias last year. Anyway, have you heard of the gigapump technique? Okay, so you know briefly what it is. So I'm just gonna probably go through it. Basically, what we have. The instrument is here, so if you want to rotate or write something, basically it's composed of a digital SLR camera, which allows the use of very high quality telephoto lenses. Then you have a robotic unit, which allows the coverage of an entire field of view in very small increments, both in horizontal and vertical angles. Then you have a sturdy as possible tripod, and also here you can see briefly it's a leveling unit. Everything needs to be leveled when you're taking the photograph. That's about it. Of course, if you go into the field work, you need a very good waterproof case. Anyway, what happens? This was supposed to be a movie. Anyway, I will show the the instrument in use, it's better if we actually watch it. What happens, as I said, you have a tilt of from -65 to +90, which is not ideal because in some cases, if you want to document horizontal surfaces, you can't really, because the entire body of this particular unit needs to be standing upright. If you put it like this, you risk damaging it because it's quite heavy with all the cameras and things, and it will not work properly. So basically, you don't have access to anything that's below this tilt, which means always that you're going to have a perspective distortion if you're documenting something horizontal. Anyway, but it can turn 360, which is good. Anyway, what happens? Basically, what the camera does, it uses. So if you get a normal camera, a DSLR, nowadays it's about 12 megapixels per image. It can go. This camera that I have here, it's a Nikon D800, and it's capable of recording 36 megapixels per image, which is really good because what you do. Actually, you take a telephoto lens, and then you split your field of view into several shots, which always overlap by at least 30 to 45%. And this is done very easily with the use of the robotic arm. You can also do this, which is you can also do this manually if you know what you're doing. But the most important thing is that actually there is a nodal point of the lens somewhere here, if you can see it. Anyway, it's somewhere in between the camera and the telephoto lens. And basically that nodal point, while the entire unit moves, it should stay in a single position. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of errors in the final photograph. So that's why this is so complicated. Anyway, what you do, you take several photos. Actually, the imager is quite automatic. So once you establish your upper left corner and lower right, it knows how much is the angle of view for every picture that you take. It makes a calculation of how much they should overlap, and it says, okay, you need 12 rows and 6 columns. It depends for every image. Once it does that, it starts taking the photograph, and basically you end up with a set of photographs which also have a portion in which they overlap. What you do is use one of these softwares. With this instrument, the developer actually provided a complete solution. It provided the hardware, it provided software, and then also provided a website in which you can actually store your images for free, which is amazing, and it's really nice. Because otherwise, if you add up all of these pictures with a resolution of 36 megapixels in this case, it's going to add up like over an image of over 1 gigabyte or 2 or 3, and pretty much the regular computer or laptop won't open it in a single file. What you do, you upload it on the web, and it's quite nice. It's a very smart idea, because what the web browser does, it will never load the entire picture. It will only spread it into tiles, and it will only load the tiles in your very specific zoom area of interest. So it's quite smart. It's a bit detailed what happens. But anyway, you have also a software to upload on their web servers. There are also other viewers available on the web, which are very nice because they offer tools which are much more specific to scientific work. And one of them is this Giga Macro Comparative Viewer, sadly to say, I checked it today, and I think they went into business, and and probably they are going to try and sell it. They also made a really nice imager, which cost about 48,000 US dollars. Anyway, it's quite expensive, but that's for documenting very small specimens with an amazing resolution. You can check on their website, which is Gigamacro. Anyway, that viewer was really nice because it allowed you to compare two views. For example, if you have a fossil, or if you have like a stratigraphy, and then you go next year and take the Gigapan of the same stratigraphy, you can see the changes, you can see whatever dropped and what's new and things like that. Just as easily as that. It's quite nice. But it doesn't work now because I don't know what they're doing. I think they're trying to put it into money. So, everything, details about the equipment, and you can find on gigapan.com. The guys had the idea of making this when they were put up with the task of actually putting on the Mars rover a very, very small camera capable of taking high resolution pictures. And they said, okay, we can't put a big camera because it's, anyway, energy and all sorts of problems. But they said, oh, but we can put a small camera which is energy efficient, and we can do this. We can do panoramas, and then we can stitch them, and that's why if you go on this, on gigapan.com, you can see a lot of Mars panoramas, which is quite nice. Okay, I'll go to, I'm going to show you a few examples. When I was first asked to do this, Radu was telling people that I can show you how to do paleontology field work by sitting in an armchair. I have doubts about that, but anyway, when I first met with Matthias a few years ago, and also with Radu, we tested this on a very nice site of Székely Ryba-Rosia. Have you been to Ryba-Rosia? Redcliffe, whatever. So you've been? You've seen it from a distance. Anyway, it's quite an amazing site. You will see it. It offers quite a nice thing. So, so this is actually going into my. This is how it looks on the web. Sorry. So you have the Gigapan website, and you have a large collection of whatever people put as the panorama. You've probably seen it. It's a lot of crazy things happen. But also, people have started to realize that this can actually be a very important tool for scientific documentation of whatever. My specialty is archaeology, so I won't talk about the paleontology bit. If Matti or Radu wants to speak about it, I'm just going to show the picture. Anyway, it shows. It's really nice because it tells you the date, for example. It tells you the overall size. In this case, it's 2.09 gigapixels. And you can imagine the difference from 12 megapixels that you have in one photo to 2 gigapixels. I can tell you that the record for Gigapan, not for scientific use, but just documentation, is 272 gigapixels. And it's amazing. It's a view of Shanghai, probably China. And you can see like the whole city, and you can see somebody's foot on the street, like the hills and stuff like that. Anyway, it all depends on how much of telephoto zoom length you can fit onto a machine like this. This is not the best there is. You can have better machines which allow for okay, which allow for a larger equipment to be put on. What's also interesting is that you can also put this on Google Maps, so you can actually view it on this map. But I won't go into that. You have a very nice full screen, and then you can zoom in and zoom in. You'll have to wait for the tiles to load, but basically you can do this for a while. Anyway. No? We tried several shots in several occasions, and we went on specific parts of the site and documented only those. But basically, you can actually follow all the layers inside this outcrop, and you can. This is not the best screen to show, but anyway.
Eu le pot să găsim numai o clipă, că
Zi.
era oameni de ce e importantă tehnica asta. Până nu de mult, adică până să-ți cumpere filmul chestia de asta, stăteam în partea aia de avenă, în fața râpii roșii, și ne uitam cu binoclu, ca să vedem unde sunt oase, după care țineam minte copacii locul, mergeam deasupra și coboram cu corzile să le scoatem. Acum faci panorama râpii roșii, o cauți mult mai bine vezi decât cu binoclu și îți faci traseu, a doua zi te duci și le scoți.
What Radu actually said now is that the usual technique for paleontology is taking a binocular and watching out the outcrop and whatever, getting some marks that you can follow, and then you go and actually access the site. But with this one, you can probably identify all the sites in everywhere, and then you can. It's much more easily to go there. And yeah, I guess it's useful. You tell me how useful it is. This is sort of yeah, nice. I also have another view of Râpa Roșie. This one doesn't look so good, but it sometimes is really hard to photograph during the day because you have a lot of shadows and you have a lot of things happening. It doesn't look so good, but it has the detail that it needs. This is another area of the site. Oh, I didn't show you Mount Norel on the previous one, but I will. Anyway, basically you can identify a lot of things just by looking at this, and you can do this from at home, and then you say, okay, I know it's that area of the site, and because it's really hard to access this outcrop, you actually need to be strapped in, so it's not easily accessible. And by using this technique, yes, you have it. So you can identify. Matthias was really happy because he actually used this and found both. So, yeah. Okay, another use for this technique can be the documentation of actual fossils. And these images that I'm going to show you are courtesy of Raimund Albersdorfer from Germany. He's a private collector of fossils, and he has a wonderful collection. And I'm going to show you, we did some of the photographic documentation of this collection last year, in May. And some of them I choose to document them with using the Gigapan technique. Because this is a private collection, they are not available to everybody. So there is the option on the website, if you want your panorama to be private, you can actually pick something and it's private. So only the ones who have the link here which is much more complicated than the usual, anyway, freely accessible link. Mati can tell you much more than I can about what's here. Anyway, so basically you can use this screen here actually shows you much better quality. The board is not the best to show. It's an amazing fossil. I was stunned. Quite an interesting thing, this one. And another example is one of Mati's favorites. It's amazing, I can tell you. I've been there. Mati was really happy that we took this because he needed a lot of detail to identify these. So it would be nice to have a documentation for all the fossils like this. If you want to look through these later on, I can. Anyway, so what else? I also said you've probably been to Glos. Remember? Okay. So let's go for site B. And you have, this is March, 25th of March last year. Actually, yeah, last year. And also you have things happening. Anyway, you can go through the figures again. Again, you can look for bones. You can record. It's really useful if you want to see what happens. You can also make an overlay of the interpretation of the figures. You can see how things actually evolve in the sediments and everything. So it's quite useful. And for example, one of those cases in which you make an overlay, you make an interpretation of it. It's really useful when you have the comparative viewer, and you can put the overlay on top of the actual image. You can use it quite nicely. So even though the result of a Gigapan is quite a large image, it's quite easy if you have internet access. It's quite easy to work from wherever you are. It's also if you have a good computer, you can also access it locally. So you can make your own tiles on your computer. So you're the only one who has it, and things like that. That's pretty much it about the Gigapan technique. I also wanted to speak a bit about other techniques, like aerial photography, photogrammetry, 3D modeling. For these, I don't have yet examples of paleontology. I have some examples of archaeology. But they are on my computer, so I can show you later on if you're interested. I've done some. We had this rescue excavation, which we just finished. Okay. We did this aerial photography with a remote operated whatever drone, and then we managed from those pictures only. So you just survey the area. The drone actually takes pictures every 3 seconds or so, and then you collect all of those images, and you can produce a 3D model of the surface. And sometimes it's accurate enough to really show interesting things. And for example, we did a nice example of our gate, which I will show you if you're interested. Then there is also time lapse, which you probably have you done time lapse? Yeah. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to show you a couple of short movies which were. This is last year in Artec. You can tell people what you from. You remember this one?
We found a bomb.
Yeah, from okay. I think the combination of graphic keyboard and my presentation is not working today. I'm just gonna edit it. And this is it looks kind of funny, and actually I think it was. Anyway, it's a way of actually, if you do this, it's a way of recording all the things that you do actually on site, and sometimes it's useful to know who intervened, who worked, and things like this. So it's good to have an eye overhead. You can see everybody was excited, so I'm guessing it was a nice song, and it was. You can see Lulu is an intricate part of the team. And there is another use for it, and this is it. It's also funny to see this, but you can also find a very good use for it. Yep. So if you mess something up, it's going to show. Unless you're really, really fast. Okay. What else? There was something else that I wanted to talk about, and I'm doing. I started a PhD, and I'm interested in looking at the modern techniques of using photography in archaeology this time. And one of the techniques is it's called RTI. I don't know if you heard of it. It's reflective transformation imaging, and it's actually to do with analyzing very, very minute surface details by using shadows. You know, like when you're taking racking photography, which by you just put a light source very at a low angle, and then you have really nice shadows, and they show a lot of the minute details. For example, in this case, it was just an idea that I could actually apply to paleontology as well. And because in Python, when we worked on this type of fossils, documenting them, Matthias also had the idea of using several angles in which you position the light. Why? Because you have differences. You can see now this is a very standard upper left change it, you can see much better other details of the same fossils. And all of this you can put in a really, really nice software. And then you have an interactive way of choosing where your light is. A virtual interactive way of choosing where your light is, and it's really nice in interpreting things like this. Because in some cases we notice that from putting just the light on one particular angle, you can see the bone structure, you can see everything, and if you change a bit the lighting, you can see the contents of the stomach and things like that. It was quite interesting to notice that. And we didn't have time at the time to do a lot of this because it needs a lot of angles for the light. We didn't have time to do that, but it's always possible. So if you're interested in things like this, there is this technique. It's being used in conservation, in looking at the surface of paintings and stuff like that. So it can. I'm guessing it can be. I don't know if somebody applied it to ornithology, but this could be applied to this case. Okay. If you have any question, if you want to play with this, you're welcome anytime. So about it from me. Next, repeat.
An introduction. My name
Are you for
no, I'm not. I swear.
So this is for
Yeah.
did it
Yeah,
work?
it's